Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it shared here on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your story and wants to hear your experience. So reach out to me and let's get yours on the next episode of Uncomfortable. If you haven't yet, make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And once you get a chance to listen to a couple episodes or maybe view a couple episodes, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can. That alone is the most important thing you as a listener can do to help get this show out in front of more people. With more people listening, you guessed it, more great stories coming for you. If video's more your thing, then make sure you subscribe to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube, where you can get the video version of most shows, including tonight's show. If that's where you like to listen to us, please make sure to click like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you are notified with every new release. Take a minute and check out the Uncomfortable link tree, as it's the single best place that you can find anything and everything uncomfortable all in one spot. The link for that is in the description down below in the show notes. I got a great show for you tonight. The gentleman with us tonight is retired active Army, served over 20 years. Internationally recognized Bigfoot researcher, including numerous investigations and expeditions, featured more than 25 different TV appearances, 40 plus radio and online interviews. It's going to be 41 now with this. Dozens of books and periodicals. He's a guest speaker at numerous conferences around the U.S. and Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Mr. Todd Neiss. Todd, welcome to Uncomfortable.
Hey, Eric, how you doing?
I'm well, sir. I'm well. Thank you for taking the time to work this into your schedule. I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
You come highly recommended from a mutual friend of ours, Mr. Matt Orton over there at the Drunken Cryptids podcast. He says you're a great guy, and we have had a couple of phone conversations in the past, and I have to tend to agree with him that you are a very nice and likable gentleman. So I appreciate you being here on the show, and I look forward to getting into this topic of Bigfoot, which you had an eyes-on experience.
I did, and I should preface that with the fact that even though I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and obviously being kind of ground zero for that sort of activity, it never really registered me as something to really take seriously. So I wasn't a believer. Wasn't really an enthusiast at all. You might call me agnostic. Didn't care one way or the other, but all that changed for me. April 3rd, 1993, while conducting demolitions, explosive training with the Army National Guard in Oregon. Well, that was my baptism, and I've been at that ever since. This quest to reconnect with them and to learn more about them, it changed my life. 25 seconds of my entire life up to that time. I was 34 at the time. It's weird. Everything that seems to have happened since that day just goes back to that moment that
Before
really
you get into the
changed my
actual
life.
before you get into the actual moment that you saw
Mhm.
them, and I say them, that kind of spoils it, but admittedly, you're saying that you were agnostic about the idea. You weren't one way or another on it. In 25 seconds, altered your life significantly.
Yes, it was an epiphany. Total
significantly.
epiphany.
Not only a belief system, but also what would you say? A course.
It's a lifestyle, honestly.
A course correction in your life. That's crazy to have an experience like that. But it's it's crazy for somebody who hasn't had that kind of an experience. But myself, having had experiences in other aspects of let's say paranormal or the unknown, it is significant, isn't it?
It is. It was a huge detour in the path that I had taken, and I couldn't have predicted this sort of a effect on me, and I know I'm not alone when I say that because you know I'm one of well over 10,000 people that have had this experience, and sadly, uh, it's estimated that 9 out of 10 just don't come forward with it. And it was, I have to be honest with you, Eric, it was a struggle for me after the fact to decide what to do with what I experienced, what I saw, what I can't unsee, and I struggled with it for quite a long time before I made that decision to go public with it.
And how long did that take you to come to terms with, where you were uncomfortable enough, comfortable enough to actually
Yeah,
talk
right.
about it?
Well, let's see. I came back out of the field after that uh, event and made a beeline to the library and checked out every book I could on the time. Keep in mind, this is pre-internet, so we're talking 1993, and I never had an interest in it, but now obviously I had an impetus to follow up on it and learn more. And I want to say the first time I went public, it was kind of a pseudo public sort of event. I had met the Mr. Peter Byrne, a pioneer researcher in the field, was the first to contact me, and he encouraged me to, if nothing else, to join this group in Portland, where I lived at the time, called the Western Bigfoot Society. This was a group of people that met once a month in the basement of a used bookstore. It was ran by a gentleman named Ray Crow. And 25 to 30 of us would gather in this basement. It was kind of like, I don't know, I call it Bigfoot Anonymous. You know, um,
Were they all experiencers, or were they a mix of experiencers and enthusiasts?
I'd say it was almost 50-50. It was we had a lot of really, Ray was able to get a lot of really good guests in there from time to time, and he's the one that kind of took me by the hand and said, "Look, here's the podium. You're in a group of people that are going to take you seriously." And so, yeah, kind of like an AA meeting for Bigfoot. I was like, "Hi, my name's Todd. I'm a Bigfoot uh, experiencer." Hi, Todd. I still haven't got my coin yet, but
Your
anyway,
chip?
yeah, right. So so I kind of started out that way. So I mean, in a small scale, that was the first time I actually talked with people in public, and then ultimately, 1994. So just about a year later, I was approached by Peter Burns, who he said that he was working with the film crew with the TV series uh, Unsolved Mysteries, and asked me if I'd be willing to go on camera and give my testimony. I mean, at this point, nobody's thinking of me as a researcher, and whatever research I did, it was
Right.
personal, for me. But I was like the eyewitness, the token eyewitness, and so I reluctantly participated the first time on television in 1994. Later on, I would, as I got known a little bit more, I was invited to speak at the Sasquatch Symposium in British Columbia, Harrison Hot Springs. And apparently they had been doing this for a number of years. And again, the token eyewitness, not the researcher, but I did show up there in 1996, and I was invited back the next 3 years. And that's where I met, the real big dogs. Uh, Aside from Peter, I met Renee DeHinden, I met Professor Grover Krantz, John Green, Dr. John Meldrum, all the horsemen kind of came into play. A lot of other big names, but be that as it may, that's when I kind of got into the speaking circuit, and I've been doing it ever since.
Let me ask you something here. Okay, so you brought up some pretty significant names in the Bigfoot science research
community.
World.
Yeah.
And then you have, for the last
31 years.
31 years. In what was it, 2015, you started your own group, the American Primate Conservancy.
Correct. Prior to that, most people don't know, I had the American Primate Foundation, and it just kind of morphed into that. So 2015, October, to be exact, I was able to establish officially a nonprofit organization. The key being Conservancy. I always ask myself why I experienced what I did. I can think of so many things that could have been different that day, different time, different place. But for it to happen the way it did, I kind of found myself looking for a purpose, a reason why me. And
yeah.
I found that purpose in really taking a legitimate concern for the species itself. Obviously, they're fairly rare. You wouldn't consider them exotic animals, so who knows what their numbers are? And that's the problem. We don't have all the data that we want. Even say if we look for any species, any rare species, whether it be a frog or a fish or a bird or what have you, there's certain things that need to be considered when you're dealing with determining the health of the species. And so that's what the Conservancy is about. It's about trying to gather data, many different data points, try to find out exactly, what the required habitat is, what the required resources are. And through that, I think we're able to get a little closer, if you will, to the target. And then hopefully we will be able to obtain evidence in whatever form required to meet the criteria to get them officially taxonomically recognized. And that's key to getting them protected, because short of that, it's pretty much impossible to get something protected that doesn't have that sort of confidence, if you will.
Right. And I think Conservancy, in the bold-facedness of the name of your group, is specific to the animal itself, the creature,
absolutely. I mean,
the being. But
yeah,
I think that also has to come into play with the Conservancy of the habitat, which, a lot of people, I think that is one of the reasons that there is a lack of interest in proving these things real, because then the implications is if they are out there and they do live in a certain place, then they have to be provided a safe place to live, right? Especially if they are what I think they are, and that is something much more related to us than just a simple, large, dumb animal.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I have, through my research, come to the conclusion that what we're dealing with can only be in the Homo species, a hominid versus a hominid, but primate just the same. Humans are considered primates. Most people think of, there's a lot of gray area. You know, a lot of people just, when we talk about human, they immediately jump to Homo sapien, and without
Right.
regard to the fact that there were 13 iterations of Homo human, until we got to Homo sapien. And what's interesting there is that the first five iterations could not walk bipedally. And I think that's key because these things obviously do. This species obviously does. There is no hominid. I can't say this clear enough that there's no hominid. That's primates in the form of your great apes, chimpanzee, orangs, other pongenids, old world monkeys. There's none on record, even in the fossil record, that were capable of bipedal locomotion. Only humans, only the Homo species has that capability, unless you want to go back to the Jurassic and, well, there's the T Rex, No, I'm talking modern day uh, species. Only hominins can actually walk upright. And like I say, it took it took hundreds of thousands, not millions of years for them to get to that point. So if we have a species that is exhibiting this bipedal locomotion, that to me puts them in the Homo category. And by that, I really believe what we're dealing with, if in fact they are in the human species, what we're dealing with is a feral human, that being a wild human, and one which has been seemingly untouched by modern society and prefers to remain that way. And I think they do that out of survival, and it's worked well for them. And so
I don't
that's why
I don't
they're
disagree
very
with you.
evasive.
I don't disagree with you. We're kind of we're going in a cart before the horse thing here because I was going to get into your experience
Mm-hmm.
early, but since we've found ourselves here, let's delve into this and we'll talk about your experience later on.
Sure.
Because this is good stuff. And so there's always been, but it's not much talked about anymore. The missing link, right? In our evolutionary progress, the missing link was always, growing up, they spoke about, the missing link. That's not really talked about anymore. There's so many different camps on the origination of these creatures. They're either natural, they are a descendant of the Nephilim bloodline from biblical texts. There is they're the golden retrievers of the extraterrestrials that fly around in the UFOs. You know, they are by First Nation peoples referred to as a spiritual being that has 1 foot in our world and 1 foot in their own. And it has made me wonder whether if there's any, I'm getting jumbled up here, but if there's any truth to there having been a a genetic manipulation that resulted in us being what we are today. Whether it was
Now,
the
by are we talking
we as a people,
Homo
we
sapien?
Homo sapien as a
Okay,
culture.
I just want to be clear.
So if, whether it was the Anunnaki who came here and did some experiments on the little chimp man and then we were the result, whatever it was, Um, I often wonder if Bigfoot is the original us, and they're like a control group. Now, I'm not saying that they're the control group for a group of alien scientists, or they may be a control group for God, our creator. They may be a control group for Mother Nature herself. Something that has remained intact, untouched, and unchanged for whatever reason as a
Well,
control.
whatever the case may be, they are part of our biodiverse system, and for that matter, they have to play a key role. So, what you're saying is has some truth to it because they're here. Now, we have to keep in mind that thousands of species have come and gone. It's just the natural course of evolution, and we lose species every year. We find new species every year, which is good to know. But it's a matter of survival of the fittest, adaptation as climates change, and they've changed historically. We don't know, numerous ice ages and whatnot, which is, and in between, you have to assume warming ages. But what role do they play? We don't know that, and I think it's important to find that out. My thought of them is, and this is something that not a lot of people talk about, because in trying to determine their origins, where they came from, there's this thought that they had to come from somewhere else into North America. But if you do your research, you find out that a lot of the species that lived in North America during the Pleistocene era, um, which only ended 11,500 years ago at the last ice age, not long at all. We know of numerous megafauna that existed here in North America for millions of years prior to humans coming here, and humans having only been here about 23,000 years in the form of Native Americans. The issue to me is, well, we know that certain animals did take advantage of the Bering Land Strait, or what's known as Beringia,
Right.
which would open and close depending on the ice ages. The ices during the ice age, it pulled back the ocean into solid form, and the oceans would recede up to 250 to 300 feet, which would expose that land bridge. So we know that animals cross both ways, in fact, from the New World, as North America would be known, and the Old World. But nobody stops to think, is there any possibility that this species of human was indigenous all along here? And the reason I bring that up is when you look at the progression of humans in Africa and Europe and Asia, we see these, like I said, 13 variants of them. It was only 12 back until 2021 when they discovered Homo florensis. So now we've got another one. So now we're at 13. We keep finding actually humans, or at least remains of humans. But what jumps out at me is the glaring absence of human activity. When you look at the habitat, you look at the resources, are there not those elements necessary to support such a primate? And indeed, there is. There's a lot of it's really kind of a Shangri-La, if you will, had there been a species over here. And my gut tells me that the species we refer to as Bigfoot or Sasquatch may have always been here, but herein lies the difference. we look at the more modern human species north of Homo erectus. We look at Neanderthal. We look at Cro-Magnon. We look at Homo bergensis, the Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. All developed and actually lived symbiotically in Europe and in Asia. And Homo sapien is pretty much a byproduct of all those that preceded it. Now imagine, if you will, a species of human that existed in North America and was completely without competition. An apex predator that pretty much owned the place. And such an animal, without any competition with any other human species, would turn into really the ultimate human, if you ask me. The survivors that have been with us all this time. A lot of people talk about the theory of Gigantopithecus. A lot of people buy into that, having migrated up across the Bering Strait. But I've researched that a lot, and generally when you have mass migrations like that, it's usually driven by either catastrophic weather, catastrophic geological events, or a over competition for certain resources. In the case of Gigantopithecus, that does not seem to be the case. You got to keep in mind, we're talking about an animal that lived for the most parts in the tropical regions close to the equator, and that particular area was not as effective, obviously, as the northern climes. But we look at what they ate, and from what we were able to tell from the dentine and the study of the teeth, and there have been, at this point, hundreds of them recovered, and we've been able to look at the diet. They ate seeds, they ate grains, they ate fruit, they ate grasses, they ate bamboo. None of that was available to them north of China, if you will, and they would have to have transcended through that to get to the Bering Strait, and then crossing over the strait. You're talking about, even at the warmest period, still much like a tundra, if you will. And I don't see how such a large ape, which was much larger than what we're dealing with in the form of Bigfoot, having been able to survive, and more to the point, having a reason to leave where they were at to begin with. I don't have an issue at all with the concept that Bigfoot, this species, has always been indigenous, has been part of the megafauna through the Pleistocene, and had the run of the place without any competition with our humans. And as such, they've developed into the ultimate species. Now, what is it that's driving them from us? Well, it's technological advances that Homo sapiens, and even amongst Homo sapiens, we see differences. We look at Native Americans that came here 23,000 years ago. It's quite primitive. We look at them as the Clovis type humans, and 300 years ago, here comes another iteration of humans from Europe that completely decimated over a fairly short period of time the Native Americans that were here. And certainly the Bigfoot had to have been a witness to that. And where they might have lived symbiotically with the Native Americans, this new wave of humans, I don't know about you, but it was such an advanced technology that is, think about it, 300 years. Who knows? Maybe that's 10 generations, 15 generations, not very long, of observing us going from literally riding horseback to flying in jets and trains and automobiles and all this stuff. I would think it would be almost tantamount to us today seeing a UFO or a bunch of UFOs landing in the mountains around us. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would be terrified by the advanced level of academic technology,
Well,
especially seeing what they did.
it makes really good sense, the things that you say, but it does draw some questions, maybe just commentary from me on it.
Sure.
If there's truth behind the First Nations descriptors of these things, if there's truth to many of the people that we have talked to, that you have interviewed, that have had experiences laying their eyes on these beings, many times people will report that they have very strong Native American features. And I guess where I go with this is in Australia. Several reports of these Yowie are reported to resemble much larger versions of Australia's indigenous population.
Correct. Aborigines.
Facial features and the darkness of the skin, and it's just such a strange thing for me. It's like, I know at one point, I don't know, but we're told that at one point all of the land masses in the world were together.
Contiguous. Yeah.
So at what point did Australia become this island unto itself? And were they there already? And if they weren't, how did they get there? A lot of the other countries, Russia, that makes sense. The Bering Land Bridge thing, that makes sense for migration to, from. Could have came here from somewhere, could have came from here and went somewhere. And then just the significant physical differences between the reports of what are seen out there on the West Coast, up in the Northwest, and what's seen down in Florida. Significant differences because of the geographical location, the climate change. They don't need to be as big. They don't need to be as hair covered down in a state like Florida, where it is so hot and muggy, and the change of it just makes me wonder how is there that comparison, that familiarity to the native indigenous culture, the indigenous population of certain countries that have these things? Why do they resemble them?
Well, do we resemble them, or do they resemble us? It's a two-edged sword.
Exactly.
I mean, honestly, Eric, look at the distribution just of Homo sapiens around the world. And let's back up the bus before we had transoceanic capabilities of travel. Let's go back, 1,000 years, where oceanic travel was probably not even thought of. It's people adapt to their environments. Humans, I'm talking Homo sapien humans. We see how people in Africa are more dark skinned. We see variations in Asia of different types of people that took on different skin tones, different hair colors, more or less hair. We look at Alaska. We look at South Pacific. Humans are have a lot of variety in and of themselves based upon the environments that they adapted to, and I believe these things have just as much variations as humans, because guess what? They are human. Uh, I hate the fact that people tend to stereotype these things in terms of what they look like, in terms of behavior, in terms of intelligence. And the fact is, we wouldn't dare do that with Homo sapiens, with our, fellow humans,
Right.
because there is such diversity. I mean, I can tell you what, just moving from Oregon to Arkansas here, I see completely different cultures, even today. So, uh, but you talk about the missing link, and Grover Krantz uh, really delved into that in his book, uh, and I've been studying his books. I knew him personally, and we've talked on the subject more than once. And he's kind of written off that missing link part. Also, it's brought up with Dr. Brian Sykes, another amazing man, a geneticist from England who recently passed away. In his books, he wrote a book called The Nature of the Beast, is where he started at the very end. He did all sorts of genetic studies in Europe, and he could tell you that Irish people are 15% Spanish, 4% Italian. He really he mapped out the human genome without any reference to borders, just area, if you will, and he was able to tell how humans migrated from where to where they are now. He also did a study on Native Americans, which is amazing. But his last book he wrote was called Nature of the Beast, because he got interested in that. And he, as well as Grover, have pretty much dismissed the whole concept of missing link. The problem, we look at evolution in terms of trees, in terms of branches, if you will, and we see the great apes and pongenids in the primate branch go this way, and we see the Homo sapien branch separate from that of a certain period of time, about 6.5 million years ago. And Brian was really, Dr. Sykes was really, uh, when he looked into genetics and the way genetics got distributed, he goes, we've made the mistake of thinking of the lineage of primates and humans specifically as trees and as branches. And he goes, we have to rethink ourselves in terms of not branches, not trees, but bushes. And I thought that was very telling, because in that sense, we kind of blur the distinctions between branches and really look at the fact that maybe it's not a big family tree, but a big family bush, and maybe we're not so far apart as we think we are. The issue with the missing link is that it implies that there was hybridization. And in genetics, we learn that hybrids are very rare. And the survival rate of hybrids is nominal, to say the least. Hybrids in general are not even able to reproduce. And it takes a very strange combination of genetics, chromosomes, and genes to successfully make that happen. But most hybrids are they're
Sterile.
sterile. They're sterile. They just they hybridization is not really a big part of nature. When I say that, we say, well, oh look, well, you say in one breath Homo sapien is a product of Neanderthal and just Cro-Magnon and whatnot. Yes and no. Without getting into the weeds as far as genetics are concerned, it's just that male DNA does not transfer well as well anyway as mitochondrial DNA or female DNA. Um, that Y chromosome is not quite as functional, if you will, as the XY. So they've both pretty much dismissed it as being a hybrid, so much as its own individual species in and of itself. One which has, don't get me wrong, it has evolved, as have every species. Again, you either adapt or go away. But so it's not to say they haven't changed over there. They haven't adapted and brought in traits that they needed for survival. But as far as that link between man and Bigfoot, I don't believe it's there. Certainly not in modern times. And to suggest that Native Americans share some physical traits with the Bigfoot, I'm not convinced that it's due to inbreeding. It's just that we do share the fact that we are both members of the Homo species. But yeah, I think the missing link theory has really been put to bed with modern genetics and what these gentlemen came up with. So again, the question is, did they already exist? Do they exist as an independent species? And I believe they do.
The thing that I go back to a lot is that if you were to take, like Noah did, and took an animal, one of every animal, and lined them up from the smallest little mouse to us and everything in between, including Bigfoot, based on tens of thousands of descriptions. What is the one thing that does not look like it belongs here? It's us. Everything has hair or scales or protective skin or claws or nails or things that are adapted to their environment and what it is they need to do, how they need to eat, how they need to burrow, how they have. But when you line all those things up and then you put us there, to me, it's always, for years, it's always been just a very striking thing to me that we're the one thing that does not look like it belongs. Now, maybe that draws credence to divine creation. Maybe that draws credence to another civilization having tampered with something that already was here, and now we're the result of that. I'm not saying one way or another, but when you look at an animal looks like an animal. They completely different breeds, completely different. I mean, a platypus is a weird animal, but when you put it next to a beaver or you put it next to a mule deer, they kind of look like they go together because they're hair covered. Right. And, but when you look at us.
Well, human in the form of Homo sapiens is there's no question that we stand out as a unique species, especially with regards to intelligence, and I think it's important to make the distinction when we talk about intelligence is how we measure intelligence. When we talk about the intelligence quotient or IQ, a measure of human knowledge, intelligence, that is of an intelligence born of academics, if you will, of technology, based uh, thoughts and reasoning that yeah, but it far and away exceeds any other species on the planet. And where and how that took place, that distinction happened, is yet to be determined. But hopefully we will be able to nail it down. But again, going back to intelligence, people ask me all the time, are Bigfoot intelligent, or are they just a bunch of dumb apes, a bunch of monkeys, or what have you? And I have to point out that there's a difference between academic intelligence and primal intelligence. And
For
when
sure.
it comes to primal intelligence, we have to understand that Homo sapiens at one time had a tremendous amount of primal intelligence. And over time, due to the whatever happened that separated us from Neanderthal and other hominins, something triggered a almost an eruption of intelligence on a more of an academic level, which is it's kind of a two-edged sword, because I mean, we have been able to, in terms of adapting, to use technology to counter any sort of climate or geological or whatever sort of uh, environmental changes that happened. As humans, we're able to, throw on a coat or turn on a heater, turn on air conditioning. And in the process, we have sacrificed that primal intelligence over generations. Really, not that many, to be honest with you. You go back to the 1800s here in the United States, and if you didn't hunt, you better know a rancher, or you're not going to have any
Right.
meat on the table. Okay. We had literally only a couple hundred years ago, we had a tremendous amount more primal intelligence that we do today. And as generations go forward, we are regressively losing that primal intelligence.
Well,
So
I
I
think
don't
that
think it's fair. Go ahead.
I think that goes hand in hand with becoming what we call civilized. You know, at the point where you used to have to sleep with your small family pod around a fire and worry about whether something, a predator, was going to come out of the woods and try to take either your elderly or your newborns. We slept with one eye open. And I think that as time has progressed and as we have put walls around us and roofs around us, over us, and the ability to lock doors and lock windows, we have drowned out those primal uh, those primal abilities.
Well, requirements, to be honest. And
You know,
no, you make a good point. And that when people ask me, who's more intelligent, humans or Bigfoot, or what is the level of intelligence? They're obviously intelligent. I can tell you that without a doubt, that they are able to recognize certain needs and requirements and adapt. I have literally seen tree structures, and I'm not talking little cross trees and sticks that's randomly being called, Bigfoot signs or glyphs or what have you. I'm talking about, I've seen only four in over 30 years. I've found four structures far deep into the forest that definitely betray any sort of weather phenomena, in that they're anecdotal structures, meaning there's nothing anywhere around it that should it have been a weather phenomena, it would have affected other trees in the forest. Like I'm talking about structures that show some engineering to them. But again, it's a very primal engineering sort of thing.
Primitive, yeah.
It deals with tree selection, it deals with gravity, it deals with coverings and whatnot. But the bottom line is this: if you want to compare really apples and oranges in this case, primal intelligence, or what I call PIQ, versus academic intelligence, AIQ. People say, "Well, who's smarter?" Well, let me throw this scenario at you. Let's say, God forbid, North Korea or China, whoever, launches an EMP device over the United States and knocks out our entire electrical grid. I could tell you within a month or two, and we people would start dying. Within 6 to 12 months, probably a quarter of the population would have died. Uh, Given a decade, literally half of the Homo sapien population would be extinguished. How does that affect Bigfoot? Absolutely not a bit. So you tell me who's more intelligent? Us, who are continually dependent upon technologies that we develop, which is cool. It's gadgets, it's things that make our life easier, or the ones who retain that primal intelligence that will literally out survive us a million years from now. We have the ability to
Well,
completely annihilate the Homo sapien race, but it's not going to affect them hardly at all. They don't depend on anything because they have been and remain focused on primal survival, and they're very good at it. And every day that goes by, we're losing it. So I would
well, it,
say, in the long term, the Bigfoot will be around long after we are.
unless we scorch this place. If we scorch it, everything's gone. But
I don't
uh,
know. I don't know.
um,
Again, I
but
have to go back to just primal survival instincts. There will be survivors. They'll be few and far between as far as Homo sapiens are concerned. But I dare say that the Bigfoot will fare much better than we do. That's for sure. Don't you agree?
I do agree. Um, but it just I keep having questions, and they're not necessarily about what you're saying. It's real. They're coming because of what you're saying. So
Sure.
you you brought up us, Homo sapien. Um, I'm not quite sure at what temperature hypothermia sets in. Um, if you don't have heat and you're out in the wilderness, you're done for.
We just
If
lost two Bigfoot researchers in the state of Washington
right,
just before Christmas. And
right,
granted,
and
they could have been out hiking or camping. It doesn't matter what their activity was, but yeah, we're very vulnerable out there.
but I guess what they had clothing on, they had coats. Um, they were obviously very ill prepared for the conditions that they encountered, and God rest their soul. Um, but when it comes to these creatures, there's a lot made about maps and overlaying projected areas where these things are thought to inhabit. They do tend to, at least from what I've seen, line up with known areas where bear are also in that area, and that leads people to think that they are misidentifying a bear because it's standing up on its hind legs. I don't believe that shit at all. But so, but bear hibernate, and when they hibernate, it's not as much out of the need to get out of the cold as much as it is that during that time food is not that readily available. So they hunker down, they go to sleep, and they wake up hungry as hell.
Well, their
I don't.
metabolism actually shifts into low gear
Right.
as it does with bison.
Yeah.
Their need for certain amount of caloric intake is diminished. Their metabolism literally goes into a stasis that just kind of keeps them just a hair above of dying, but they get through it. But again, a lot of that depends on where they're at. A lot of the bears in the lower 48 go into a kind of a semi hybrid native state, but yeah, but that's again part of adaptation. So
So I guess what I'm getting at is in the case of Bigfoot,
mhm.
these creatures, I don't know that I've ever come across a single report or anecdotal story that ever references anybody seeing them use fire.
No, I have not
So,
either. No.
are they, in your estimation? I know we don't know, but in your estimation, what makes sense as far as how they're, because I realize that they have hair, right? I realize that the ones in the Pacific Northwest seem to be more thickly hair covered than the ones down in Florida. But how are they managing survival in conditions that for us would be unbearable? Do you think they're using cave systems? Do you think they're using geothermal heat by going into caves and
Well, I think the answer is somewhere in between because we look at the bears and mountain lion for instance, and other animals will they're opportunists and they will take advantage of it. Now, as a rule, no, I don't think every single individual relies upon that, but they're not stupid. Um, Around here where I'm at right now, there were 5 native tribes that passed through here, and they were all they. There's a. I am blown away at the amount of caves around here. Everything, I swear, Arkansas is almost all limestone, maybe a little marble, but a lot of limestone, and that leads to a lot of caves. In fact, within 1 mile, maybe even less, from where I'm sitting right now, there is a cliff dwelling that was inhabited for hundreds of years by one of the native tribes that came through here. Had that, and it was a fairly natural opening in the mountains that accommodated them. Again, caves, you get inside them. I don't care. Like we hit 1 degree here. No, we were -1 2 weeks ago. But had I been 100 foot inside of one of these caves, and they're all around me, I'm finding them, learning about them all the time. It's 53 to 58 degrees year round. So not only is it a respite from the cold, it's a respite from extremely hot temperatures, and I can't
yeah,
imagine any animal that wouldn't take the opportunity to utilize them. Do they need them? I don't believe so. Bears do not need caves. We had cave bears at one time. We had cave lions at one time in North America. But as a rule, no. And bears don't either. But I think they are omnivorous like a bear. They share a lot of things with bears and uh, diet and habitat as well. And so there's got to be some competition between them. But they've had, again, not having to have competed with any other human species like what was happening on the other side of the planet, halfway around the world, where we had a number of different subspecies of Homo Homo erectus, Homo australopithecus, again, Neanderthal, Vestavia. They lived simultaneously. And certain ones just happened to be more successful in hunting and gathering and ultimately cultivating crops and domesticating animals, and the ones that didn't faded out. But when you, again, halfway around the other side of the planet, you've got a species of human that it has no competition. Imagine, I mean, it's a perfect laboratory for, it's perfect. It's Shangri-La for any human species to be the only game in town, and to be an apex predator without having to fear being game for or fodder for any other animals. And that's sort of a leisurely, if you will, sort of a non-competitive lifestyle would give them plenty of time to adapt to these different fluxes in the weather. And we're not just talking what we have. I mean, we'll go -1 here to 110 in the summer,
Yeah.
but I'm talking millions of years. We're talking numerous ice ages that they were able to adapt to. And so just generationally, I think they've learned to roll with whatever Mother Nature throws at them.
There's no right
Us
or wrong
humans, not so
answer.
much.
There's
There
not,
isn't.
no right or wrong answer to what I'm going to ask you next, but just out of curiosity,
It's all speculation.
do you think there was ever a time where we coexisted with them? Not necessarily just at the same time, because obviously we do now, but do you think there was ever a time where we were living in closer proximity to them culturally?
Absolutely. We know, for instance, that humans in the form of Homo sapien have inhabited North America for at least 23,000 years. And that has only been uh, verified in the last 5 years. Because you go back beyond that, there was a good friend of mine, Kathy Strain, you may know her as an anthropologist and also a Bigfoot researcher, was involved in the oldest Homo sapien settlement to date 5 years ago was 19,000 years ago, roughly, plus or minus. And Kathy was a part of that, and that was in Northern California. Since then, in the last 5 years, we found dwellings in Oregon that go back 23,000 years. So far, say, just let's round it off to 25,000 years.
Yeah.
When you look at Native American history, and since they were without a written language, everything was passed down word of mouth, but it was considered very sacred, their history, and they had assigned individuals to maintain that linguistically. There are numerous accounts of interactions, them living symbiotically with the Bigfoot. And what's interesting when you look at Native American lore on this subject, they don't really refer to them as animals. And they, what's interesting is they were somewhat of what would be called animists themselves, in that they related with nature much more closely than we. But they'll talk about the coyote, they'll talk about the raven, the turtle, the owl in certain very adoring terms. But
Yeah, they have a reverence
but always,
for it. Yeah.
but always as a quote unquote animal, being that little bit shy of Homo sapien themselves. But when they refer to the Bigfoot or Sasquatch, they describe them as another tribe. And I think that's an important distinction because they would call them, for instance, the first ones or the old ones, referring to the fact that they were here first before Homo sapiens came on the scene. So they've made it very clear that the Bigfoot were well established prior to Homo sapiens coming on the scene. And they did live side by side with these things. Now, I don't know how much cultural social exchange went on between them, but the interactions happened considerably, in so much as visitations between them and an understanding, if you will, of real estate, because there was so much more of that to go around prior to um, uh, the new wave of humans, the Europeans that came here. And so there were certain areas that were set aside, and they were marked, if you will, as Bigfoot uh, villages, if you will, or Bigfoot areas, and they respected one another, and they pretty much stayed separate. So there was this mutual respect that went on, but yeah, they clearly made a distinction between the Sasquatch and other wild animals, and they did revere them, and they considered them powerful spirits, as well as physical beings, but they kept their distances, and so there's no question that they lived together, but there was this unspoken uh, respect between them, and you'll find that there's a large number of places that they would name it. Just speaking particularly about the Pacific Northwest, there were 6 different languages. There were, dozens of villages and dozens of tribes, but they all fall within 6 language groups. But they developed a trade jargon, if you will, the Chinook trade jargon, where they would come together certain times of the year to trade amongst themselves, and so they kind of developed this pig Latin, if you will, this trade jargon that was known as Chinook jargon, and the one word they all agreed on that described the Bigfoot was skookum. There are other words that they had. I mean, Dasanaqua, Bakwas, Itzayaha, Oma,
There's so many.
all these different names that they within their tribes, within their language groups they had. But when they got together, they'd have certain words for tree, certain words for fish, certain words for this, bear, deer, whatever, rock, bone. But skookum was a name that was associated with these creatures. And even today, there are 43 geographical name places that still bear that name: Skookum Creek, Skookum Meadows, Skookum Butte, Skookumchuck River, just south of Seattle. It's Skookumchuck means Skookum Waters. And any place that had that name attached to it, that association where they would attach the name Skookum, that was like, yeah, you don't go there. That's off limits. That they ceded that real estate to them. But it seemed to be a quid pro quo, that there was this mutual respect between them. So yeah, there was a time where they did live as very very compatible, unlike today. And again, the influx of modern cultures, more advanced cultures, I think has just served to drive them further and further back into very difficult to access areas. The more we continue to encroach into these areas, and you will see once in a while that there are some clashes. There are some encounters that happen at the edges of these the encroachments into these areas. And again, going back to conservancy, conservation, that's what I want to try to, if I can get them established as a species, and especially if they're determined to be a human species, which I do believe they are, that's a game changer. Because we look around us, we have elk preserves, we have buffalo preserves, antelope ranges, and all. We do set aside areas for certain animals, but did we not do that for the Native Americans? And I don't mean to disparage them or call them animals by any means, but I'm saying we set up a system of reservations. And just in North America, there's almost over 200 reservations, and those reservations are given the status of an independent nation within a nation. So, can we not kind of look down the road, think outside the box, and think if this species does seem to be just a very primal human species, can we not set aside some areas for them? Resources be damned, as far as human needs, as far as logging and whatnot. Can we not set aside certain areas that these things can be given an opportunity to exist outside of the modern world? Because it seems that that's what they want and that's what they need. We don't log in our national parks. I mean,
Right.
can we not take something like find some regional areas like the Olympic National Park in Washington, take a a portion of that and just basically restrict Homo sapien incursion into that without permission, without really their permission. We just say, look, over time, I think they'll understand that this area we're not going in there anymore. This is theirs, and they can live there in peace and exercise their cultures, just like we did with the Indians in the reservation. They have their own autonomy, and I think in time that's a possibility. I just, for me, Eric, what I saw, what I experienced that day that we have yet to talk about, anyway, is that I know what I saw was extremely rare, and I feel very fortunate to have been witness to it. But I want to make sure that my kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids have at least, albeit very rare, I want them to have the opportunity that I did. I want to make sure that this species is given its due in terms of respect and that we make sure that they don't go into extinction. They're very, very unique species, and they're not that different from us. I honestly don't believe that, other than size. I mean, physically, they are obviously, but they've had to become what they are. And I think we need to respect that, and hopefully, when we get over this glass wall we keep running into, where science doesn't want to step outside the box and even accept the possibility, we citizen scientists are left to our own devices to try to solve this enigma. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to do that.
What do you think is as it stands right now, with what information is available, the evidence that has been collected, that within people of your acumen consider to be legitimate evidence of their existence? What do you think
that's a good question.
What do you think the best of that is?
That's a good question, because a lot of what would have been considered legit evidence, say 50 years ago, has to be questioned, and partly because of technology. I think the fact that the Patterson Gimlin film shot in 1967 on 16 millimeter celluloid film, had it happened today on digital video format, would never have gotten the traction it has, because you have to look back at the era. They didn't have Photoshop. They didn't have ways of editing video and whatnot. You
AI.
got the real deal, you know. So in a sense, our technology is kind of biting us in the butt when it comes to, we could have all the legitimate video in the world, unless it's incredibly undeniable footage, it will always be suspect of having been manipulated because of technology. So today, because of that technology, we're really pretty much bound to DNA. Is going to be a game changer, and DNA not alone, but DNA for sure. There's some new technologies coming out, and which may be of use. Solid phase micro extraction, for instance, SPME, otherwise, is not that new of technology, but it's a way of being able to capture a chemical signature from certain specimens. Even a scat, for instance, we had a speaker biologist come to my annual gathering, Beachfoot, Tim Cassidy, PhD in biology, and worked with fish and wildlife, and was able to work with this solid phase micro extraction, and it's pretty cool stuff. I mean, it's less expensive than DNA. It's by far. It's a lot quicker. I mean, for a couple $100, I'll give you a case in point. If you come across a scat, okay, a stool left behind,
Mhm.
there is this device that you can wave over that scat. You don't even have to make contact with it physically, because everything has a certain rate of radioactive decay,
Mhm.
and we're constantly sloughing off that those molecules. This is the reason bloodhounds can track down a human, because we're constantly shedding skin cells every day and regenerating them, you know. But we're also sloughing off molecules. Well, this is where SPME comes in, where you can literally, all you have to do is get it close to the specimen, and then retract it back to a sealed, hermetically sealed uh, container, and take it to a lab, and with the proper equipment, they can put together a chemical fingerprint that is not parts per million, not parts per billion, but parts per trillion, in terms of being able to measure up to 90 different chemicals that were captured that are specific to that specimen. And so you go, okay, so we've got this chemical fingerprint, it's got X amount of, iron, sulfur, ammonia, whatever. And you got this lovely little fingerprint, but we don't have a database to compare it to.
I
Right?
was just going to ask, but to compare
Yeah.
it to what?
So the interesting thing about solid phase micro extraction is it's come on the scene literally 20 years ago, to be honest with you. It was used in the perfume industry to try to figure out the proper chemical formulation for that Spanish fly, right? And then eventually coffee growers got into it, to where they were able to test different batches of coffee. But again, with this instrument not even touching the coffee, but just capturing the chemical signatures. And then vineyards got into it when it came to different wines, different years of wines. So the perfume, but that's where it came from. And now Fish and Wildlife are using it to identify and start putting together a database, and Mr. Cassidy worked with a study where they studied 4 different felines: mountain lion, cougar, mountain lion, bobcat. I know there was domestic cat in there, and there was a fourth one, and they had scat that they were able to test, and they could do a blind test using solid phase micro extraction to 100% identify which species it belonged to once they got that database set. And then, to their surprise, they were actually able to differentiate between the same animal or the same species. You could have scat from 5 different bobcat, for instance, and you'd be able, let's say you had 100 samples, you'd be able to pick out which ones belong to which cat, specific individual. And it got to the point where they can tell whether they're pregnant. They could, just by looking at the chemical signatures. So technology is coming along to where things like DNA, SPME, God knows what's going to come up, next year. Video footage is tough. That being said, photographs and video used to be thrown out automatically, but there's a body of scientists, zoologists, biologists in Stockholm, Sweden, that are charged with naming new species and monitoring the health of them, that actually accepted, it was in the Journal of Science, they accepted a species. I won't get into the specifics, it's not important, but it was the first time ever, based solely on a photograph, actually it was a series of photographs, that they accepted a subspecies actually as a completely unique subspecies and gave it a taxonomic name. Never been done before. So it really depends on the situation, but by and large, photographs, video, unless they're exceptionally clear, which for some reason eludes us with this species.
It's because they're blurry.
Well, we can go down that rabbit hole another time, but I've worked on some theories as to why we've had difficulty photographing them clearly, why people have actually thought that these things either appeared or disappeared.
I've got a theory as well.
Yeah. These are some things I've been working on the last year, and which will come out in this book that I'm penning and hopefully getting published here in the next few months, I hope. But yeah.
Well, I tell you what. Can I get you to commit to doing another show?
Yes, I'd be happy to.
And in that show, we'll call it the blurry connection. Because I think that while different, we'll probably wind up in the same place, your theories and mine. And I think that would make for a very interesting topic.
You might be right. I would be inclined to call it the bridge. And the reason being that because of an experience I had based on something that I had kind of pigeonholed into paranormal, supernatural, sort of beyond science, modern science explanation. I had my butt handed to me when I actually experienced something that I had put in that category, and then I had to go out and figure out how that happened. And it put me on a course to try to find other scientific explanations for certain phenomena that people have experienced, and again, that'll come out in my book, but I've gone down this rabbit hole, and the further I go, the more I'm amazed at how a number of different physiological um, conditions can account for what people have experienced. I don't have a problem with. I don't disagree that they didn't have an experience. I might have
An
uh,
alternate way of which it
it,
was the
it comes
causation of
down
it.
it comes down to interpretation, and I think perhaps they've misinterpreted, and it's easy to do, especially when you experience something that doesn't seem real, or doesn't seem like that there's a logical explanation for it. And a lot of times in those cases they get exaggerated or embellished, and but I'd like to bring it all back, and I want to stand on that third rail between science and biology and paranormal supernatural, and see if I can't build that bridge between them and say, hey, if you'll give me an opportunity, and I'm speaking to both people in the room, if I'm talking to the scientists and the paranormal, say, look, can we have this little kumbaya moment, if I can explain to you that these people aren't nuts, and we have a lot of what I found out we've known for 70, 80 years. It's just never been applied in this particular case because it wasn't a practical application or had a commercial value. But what I found is amazing, and I think that I think we're going to find that uh, you and I are probably singing off the same sheet of music. So yeah, let's do that. Let's
Yeah,
do
let's do
that.
that.
But
All
I think
right.
it'll be a lot of fun.
Tentatively, the bridge to blurry or the blurry bridge.
Okay.
I've got it written down.
All right.
Um, but let's leave people hanging on that one. Let's get
Sure.
into what prompted all this for you
For me.
back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I have to say that I wasn't a believer. I wasn't a cheerleader for the possibility of these things being around. I honestly had to see it to believe it. That's the category I put it in, and not dismissed it entirely, but it's like, you know, I got I got to see it to believe it. Well, on April 3rd of 1993, while conducting explosives training in the mountains of the Oregon Coast Range in Northwest Oregon, um, my unit, the 1249th Combat Engineers, had three different sites. These were gravel quarries that we conducted these very large explosives. I'm talking hundreds of pounds of TNT, plastic explosives, C4, ammonium nitrate, depending on what the training scenario was. And so we had blasted these huge explosions at the first two sites. We went on to the third and final site, which was a cratering charge, 250 pounds of ammonium nitrate that we'd been soaking in diesel for like 3 hours. Big boom. Big boom. We're talking a large mushroom cloud, maybe 2,000 feet high, and a small earthquake, temporary earthquake that you're going to feel it. You're going to hear it. You're going to see it. You're going to feel it. And anyway, we had set the fuse on that last charge, and then got on our vehicles and headed off for a safe distance to await the explosion. I was in the back seat of a Humvee, sitting behind the driver, and it was a beautiful day, especially for April on the Coast Range. My God! But it was a bright, sunny day, not a cloud in the sky, and so I had the window down, and being that I had hunted that area for both elk and deer, it was just natural for me to be looking around the countryside for critters, right? Well, I got a little more than I bargained for, because we rounded this this right-handed, very long sweeping right-handed corner. And as we did, this clear cut came into view, which gave me a direct line of sight to the previous gravel pit quarry, if you will, that we had detonated perhaps an hour and a half before that. And when that quarry came into sight, I noticed three very dark figures standing out there in the open. And my first thought was, oh my God, there's civilians in the area and they're in a very dangerous area. How'd they get past our security? And, and I was about to say something when I realized, got a very good look at them, and I realized that they weren't people, they weren't humans. Well, I guess, in hindsight they were, but not Homo sapiens. And I say that due to a number of things. Imagine, if you will, the quarry, the gravel quarry was made up of basalt, and basalt is kind of a light gray colored, almost like cement colored rock. And on this bright sunny day, I've got these three jet black figures juxtaposed against this light gray backdrop. So the contrast was very stark, and so I could clearly make out the silhouettes and the arms. Like, I can't get over the arms. The arms went not. They easily just naturally fell down to the level of their knees, if not further. But super long arms, and even the legs were disproportionate to that of a human torso. And then the fact that, they just seemed extremely large, if you will. And not only that, they had a physique of a bodybuilder. All three of them. There were three of them watching us as we descended this road across the ravine, trying to get away from the impending explosion. But I've just got transfixed on this, and I'm like, oh, it didn't make sense. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like you'd have to be there, right? But the other thing was that while the larger of the three, the one that stood in the middle, stood there like a statue, and they're no mistake, they were facing us, observing us. There were two either side of it, and they easily would have been at least 7 feet in height, very broad shoulders. Again, the physique of a bodybuilder, not a stitch of clothes on them. But it was this activity that the two that flanked that larger one that was doing was this swaying, this rocking right to left, just like shifting weight from one foot to the other, and these long pendulous arms that extended down to their knees were swinging right and left, as they shifted, rocked back and forth, and they did it the entire time I watched them. And
what do you estimate the distance from you to
Well, I don't have to do that anymore, Eric, because I had estimated that when Peter Byrne, who was at the time with the Bigfoot Research Project, when I contacted them, they sent me a questionnaire, a report form, and I filled it out. I put on there roughly this is going to probably freak some people out and started, oh my God, that's forever. No, I had said, basically 1,000 feet, which would be maybe around 900 yards. Okay, so 3 football fields. When Google Earth came out, I was able to locate the quarry and that road we were on, the apex of that turn. And they have a measuring tool, so I was able to measure from the apex of that turn down to that quarry, to the center point of the quarry, and it came in at about two, give or take 10 yards. It came about 282 yards. Okay. Seems like a long ways away, right? Keep in mind, clear sunny skies, unobstructed view. I watched them for between 20 and 25 seconds. Pretty long view. When we go to the range as an Army soldier, we are tasked to qualify with the M16 at 300 meters. No optics, no scopes, 300 meters, iron sights. We have to hit targets at 300 meters, and these targets are generally about 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide. These little, we call them Ivans, or these little plastic pop-up targets. I hit those 300-meter targets with no glasses, with no scope, no optics whatsoever. I hit those 300-meter targets pretty regularly. And I'm not bragging because I can't hit the 200-meter targets to save my ass. But for whatever reason, with that weapon and those sights, I seem to nail those 300-meter targets. So if I can spot a 3 foot by 2 foot half human silhouette popping up at 300 meters, which is actually a little more than 300 yards, about 308 yards. I'd have to check, but anyway, I can see them clearly, a small 2 by 3 foot human silhouette. I can certainly see a 7 to 8 foot tall creature right out in the open at 200, well, less than 300 meters for sure. And had I had a weapon, I could have easily shot him. But
you said it was and that's an interesting point too, because I want to get back to that. You could have easily shot.
Not that I would have, but
so if you said it was a beautiful sunny day in April,
yes,
complete, clear, unobstructed view of these things.
Yes, sir.
You liken their color to a dark black silhouette up against the light gray basalt.
Mm-hmm.
Was the coloring literally silhouetted because of the way they were lit by the sun, or is that an indication that it was jet black hair? Were you able to see that? And did you see any kind of tone of skin?
Eric, now you're making me think. I hate that. So this is April. So the sun would have been between where it would have traversed in the summer and winter. So and always slightly to the south, but more so in the winter. So So I'm trying to figure out what direction the sun would have been hitting. Hang on. Summer. Yeah, the sun would have been coming in from the north. Yeah, so so they would have been casting a shadow directly away from me toward the rock walls of the gravel quarry. Thank you. I really hadn't thought about that. I hadn't put that together, but yeah. So they would have been getting the sunlight directly on their exposed front. Yeah. God, why haven't I? As soon as I think
this is what I do. I ask the questions.
No, but I mean, as soon as I think I've thought of every single angle on this, somebody brings up something. I hadn't thought of that. But I've actually been, just so you know, I've been hypnotized twice.
Have you?
In regards to this sighting, by a hypnotherapist by the name of Doug Meacham, who volunteered to do that because he had an interest in Bigfoot and Bigfoot eyewitnesses. And I'm not the only one he's interviewed, and he's videotaped all of those interviews. But I was a little apprehensive to go under hypnosis, but his way of bringing out details that you don't necessarily recall, and not by leading questions whatsoever. He's very good at that, to just open-ended questions. But
Were
he
there
will
any
take.
glaring things that came out of that hypnosis as far as detail that you didn't realize you captured?
Perhaps maybe to him, as far as, so I remember he would say, he would take you to a level of blankness, if you will. Everything surrounding you at that place, at that time, in that moment, and I mean, in his clinic, is just like a blank whiteboard. Get you to that point. There's sound, smell, sight, everything. He pretty much gets you down to a level of a blank sheet of paper, and then he brings you to that particular incident. And he's so good because he would like say, okay, you're you're there, and you're looking at the Sasquatch, the three individuals. What do you see? And of course, I'm going to pretty much relate what I always have. And then he would go, all right, now let's do a 180. You're the Bigfoot. You're looking through the eyes of the Bigfoot, and you're looking up at you. What do you think the Bigfoot's seeing? Giving you a completely different perspective. And the whole concept is the human mind is the most powerful hard drive ever built. It can hold an entire lifetime, and not just a video. Sound, smell, taste, touch, all of it.
Yeah.
An entire lifetime, a brain can hold that, and you will access perhaps 7% of what your brain's recorded, unless somebody skilled like Dr. Meacham can pull that out of you. He can take you back to a time when you were a teenager on a couch with a friend sitting across from you and having a conversation, and not only bring up the conversation, but he can say, hey, is there a clock on the wall or anywhere in the room?
Yeah.
And if there was, trust me, your peripheral vision picked up on it. You didn't think about it. You didn't even look at it. What time is it? You can tell them. Is there any music in the room, or is there something on the TV? Well, you might not have looked at the TV, or were actually paying attention to the radio, but yeah, what's playing? And you could accurately tell him what was on the TV or what song was playing on the radio. Your mind has all this stuff locked in there. It's just a job of a hypnotherapist to bring it out. So then he would take me virtually and say, now you're standing to the right, and you're exactly halfway between you and the Sasquatches. And so they're to your right, you're to your left. What do you see from there? So he just kind of walks you around the compass, if you will, and he'll take you to the other side. Now the Bigfoot's on the left and you're on the right. So what he's doing is trying to grab some peripheral stuff that you might not have really locked onto because you were so focused on what was going on, and draw out these things. And yeah, to tell you the truth, there were some things that in hindsight I hadn't really focused on, so therefore it didn't pop up in my initial explanation of what I saw. And I have those tapes. He sent them to me. It's weird to watch yourself under hypnosis, but just for your audience's sake, because I was a hypno virgin. I always thought you were unconscious. You don't remember what you did, and all of a sudden you come out of it, and what did I do? Did I, cluck like a chicken, bark like a dog? No, you're conscious. You're very conscious of what's going on at all times. In fact, it's almost like ultra conscious, because when he strips away all the distractions and puts you in that white paper sort of scenario and then brings you back to where you're at, it is very crystal clear, probably maybe even more so because of even the time you looked at it, because you're not in that shock factor, you're not having your judgment questioned or clouded
Yeah.
by the moments, because now you're not technically there, you're virtually there, and sometimes you can see things even more clearly than when you were in the moment.
Were you able to pull out any skin color or facial features or anything?
No, so you're not going to get any sort of amplitude on detail, so to
Yeah.
speak, as far as uh,
You
he's not
only
going to be
saw
able
what you
to,
saw.
he's not going to be able to really like
Zoom
necessarily
in. Yeah.
zoom you in. You're kind of trapped in that prism of the situation. But yeah, there are some minor details that you might not have thought of while you were experiencing that, because you're in shock. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
it's a traumatic situation. But you know, in a more sterile environment, such as a hypnotist hypnotist clinic, without any distractions, sometimes you can get, you know, because you're not in that state of shock, that you can get some more details. And yeah, I would say he did bring out things for me. Again, without leading questions, very open ended. You know, he didn't say were they black, were they brown, or were they kind of blackish
Right.
brown, was it dark brown? No, he'd say what color are they. You know, keep it open ended. And no, he's great at what he does. And like I say, I'm just grateful that he's been willing to to get involved, using his talents in that regard. But he's got a pretty good database of eyewitness accounts through hypnosis. It's a great tool. It's a great tool. I'll tell you that much. I
Is that
I will
is
say this, and I got to say this. Both times he brought me back, and there's no other way to describe it. He brought me back to reality, to basically snap me out of it, if you will. It was so emotional that I had tears streaming down my face.
from having relived the event
Oh
or
yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it was both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. It's hard to explain. Um, at one point, the second time, he had brought up, and we had talked about it ahead of time, about 5 years later in 1998, when I was putting together an expedition with. Had the fortune of having Peter Byrne and Ron Moorhead on my team. We spent 8 days roughly in the same area where I had that sighting, and I got roared at by one of these things at very close range, and it put me in a state of almost paralysis. And the second time we did the hypnosis, he he wanted to follow up on that, and that one not only had tears coming out of my, I mean, he brought me out fairly quickly when he realized how absolutely uh, scared I was.
yeah.
But I remember I was wearing jeans, Levi's or whatever, and I ended up, my hands were just laying on my thighs, you know, laying back on the couch, if you will. And when he brought me out of it, I had both of my jeans gripped in my hands. Uh, I had grabbed them, if you will,
Yeah.
grabbed some material from the thighs of my jeans and had them balled up in my hands in a very tight grip, because I was so absolutely. I mean, he put me back exactly in that place, and I don't want to ever go back there again. But yeah, he called that one pretty short. He just, as soon as he saw what was going on with me, he said, "Okay, you know, we had a key word to
Yeah.
bring me
Safe
back out
word.
of it. Yeah, it's a safe word. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. We had established that before we even went into the process. But
You bring up
it's
Ron
very
Moorhead.
effective, and it literally. I mean, I keep saying not literally. But it will virtually uh, take a person back and place them in that situation as long as they're comfortable with what's going on. And he's very good at what he does. But yeah, that second round was pretty intense. Yeah.
You bring up having had Ron Moorhead with you. I've had
Hmm.
several great conversations with him. He actually spoke for me at my Bigfoot and Brews event conference that I've had a couple of years in a row. But I actually have him and Scott Nelson both coming on the show to to not necessarily just go over the Sierra Sounds, but that is the catalyst that had brought them together, and now they're great friends. And to kind of delve into how that's changed Ron's perspective by what Scott found, and how Scott's life changed because of what Ron presented him. But I'm looking forward to doing
Hmm.
that. How
You
do
know,
you?
I have yet to meet Scott. I've known Ron for nearly 30 years, and we've been very, very, very good friends. We've
What a nice guy.
yeah. He was on that expedition in '98, and then um, in 2002, he and Peter and I and Al Berry, by the way, Al was still alive. Al was the one that actually recorded this
Mm-hmm.
year. So it was Peter, Al Berry, Ron Moorhead, and little me in the group for a week at Bluff Camp Louse Camp down at Bluff Creek. We spent a week down there doing some research as well as filming a documentary. Um, hell, Ron was one of my team members on Operation Sea Monkey, the expedition we did in 2016 in the Broughton Archipelago in Canada. And actually, Ron and Carrie spent a week with me sailing the British Virgin Islands.
Nice.
So we know each other pretty well. But I've yet
Super
to meet
super
Scott.
guy.
Oh,
Well,
totally, totally.
I've had a couple of phone conversations with Scott now here just recently.
Hmm.
I can't say enough about the guy. Just the most personable guy you'd want to meet. Very friendly, very open. Just fantastic. I'm really looking forward to the episode because I think it's going to be a new insight for people who know Scott because of what he did, and they know Ron because of what he's done. But I don't know that anybody's ever had these two together to talk about the things that we're going to talk about. So hopefully it's a good
Well, and
show.
you might want to add a third element to that. And I don't mean to speak for you, but surely Brett and Jill of Flash of Beauty fame, the
Yes, yes,
documentaries.
yes.
So they're doing a documentary. Hopefully, I'm not letting out too information. They're doing a documentary with Ron Moorhead called "Voices in the Wilderness." They're still working on it. And I met a gentleman down in Louisiana by the name of Dana Wilson, who I don't know how I keep running into people like this, but he is a classically trained international opera star, opera singer. Um,
Interesting.
and you know, me, everything comes back to Bigfoot, right? It's
Yeah.
like Kevin Bacon, right? So I'm like, so I'm thinking, how can I utilize this guy? So we start talking, and I go, you know what? Have you ever heard any Bigfoot sounds? Because I'd like to send you some, and I'd like your professional opinion. Because where Scott is a cryptolinguist trained by the Navy to
Hmm.
decode languages,
Right.
coded language. Dana, being a trained linguist in his own art, in human voice, and he teaches human voice in college. he knows things Scott doesn't necessarily. Scott would look at the technical aspects of language and be able to look for patterns and whatnot, where Dana would look at at harmonics and attenuation and a lot of other big words I don't know crap about. But I mean, he threw some stuff at me the other day. I'm just like, dude, you're talking over my head. This guy can sing in like 7 different languages, and he goes around the world in tuxedos with a full Philharmonic behind him. He's amazing, but he is a very skilled human voice expert. And I've asked him to see if he can mimic some of the things, or at least do analysis with it. So I've got him hooked up with Brett and Jill, and they're actually going to get Dana together, I think, next month with Scott
Nice.
for the first time. So
Very
you got
cool.
this guy who's like a technical linguist, along with a guy who's a classically trained human voice specialist,
Yeah.
and the combination ought to be amazing. And I can't wait for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I
Very
was glad I
cool.
was able to hook them up. But you know what? Again, it's like I say, you think you've thought of every aspect of an experience that you've had, or what Ron and Al had, and others that were with them. And then you jump ahead 30, 40 years, and all of a sudden we get some different concepts or different technologies that come out that's like, oh, let's pull that back out of the trash can and rehash it based on this new technology or this new individual who has different skill sets that can give it a fresh look. So it ain't over. It ain't over.
Yeah. I've got 2 more questions for you. We're coming up on 2 hours. Um, we're definitely going to revisit another episode with the blurry bridge. But the last 2 questions for you.
Sure.
You threw out some heavy hitter names earlier in the episode that you were fortunate enough to know and get to work with to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
All researchers in their own right. Having progressed 30 some odd years in your own research, do you think that modern technology, and not even modern technology, do you think that the way that most researchers are going about it now, do they have a leg up on the old timers, or are there things that the old timers were doing that we've lost because we have adapted to new technology and new is better?
Yes. Both things can be true at the same time. I think certainly, and the shoe is yet to be dropped on technology, because it's ever, um, expanding, but things need to be considered in their own context. And I, again, like the fact that, go back to Patterson Gimlin. It was done on 16 millimeter film. Look
Right.
at the fact that when I went out in 1998 with Ron and Peter during Operation, it was called Operation Entice Contact 2, because I had already done Entice Contact the year before that. But Ron had brought, and a lot of people don't know this, he flew his own plane down. Ron is a pilot, private
Yep.
pilot, and he flew his Cessna Bushmaster to the area that we were working, and he brought with him a shoebox, a big shoebox full, and I can't make this up. It was full of all of the tapes, all the cassette tapes that he and Al
Really?
had recorded, several years worth, and they were raw, unedited tapes, and it just so happens that this antiquated 1974 Class C motorhome that I borrowed from Ray Crow with the Western Bigfoot Society happened to have a cassette deck in the dash, and speakers in the back. So I spent a lot of my downtime just plugging in tape after tape after tape after tape and listening to, again, raw. So you're not getting the best of the best, you're getting it all. But you never know what you're going to get, right? So after listening to dozens of tapes over the course of 8 days, I turned to Ron. I said, because I have both the cassette version and the CD version of the Sierra Sounds. I said, Ron, there's stuff on here that you need to get out. I mean, I like what you picked, because he literally hand-picked what to put on that first tape. But there's some other stuff in here that, I'm hearing patterns, I'm hearing words, and I'm not a linguist, but I mean, when something's said 5 times within 1 minute, it's either a word or a phrase, and there's a meaning to it. And I'll be damned if within a year he came out with that second CD. But Ron's got all that stuff. He still has it, and it's still in cassette form. I'm sure he's had it all digitized, certainly for Scott's use. Yeah. But it was quite a treat to listen to it. But so again, everything has to be taken in context with the time and the era that it was taken. Imagine what you would have had if Ron had a Tascam digital recorder back in the 70s, or had Roger and Bob had a state of the art 4K camera, So, but it doesn't mean it's the evidence that was gotten back then is useless, because in fact there are certain software applications that can bring some of that stuff, enhance it, but that you couldn't do with anything else. So the answer is yes. Next question.
He said he had two. This is going to be a deep one for you.
Oh.
How many years now altogether for you?
It'll be 32 in April.
32 years of your life.
Half of my life.
Spent chasing this enigma. Has it been a positive, or has it been negative impact on your life?
Yes. I would say, in hindsight and looking at things as a whole, it has been very positive. Certainly there have been negative aspects, and you tend to kind of roll with it, when people question your honesty, your integrity, your sanity. That's okay, because guess what? What I tell those people is, that's okay, because guess what? 10 minutes before I had my eyes open, I would have said the same thing you did. Yeah. I would have called bullshit. So I don't have a problem with you coming at me from that aspect, because A, I can't prove it, and B, I was there myself. So, but overall, I would not trade anything for what this has done for me. Because the truth of the matter is, I went in search of Bigfoot, and ultimately I found myself. And that's more, you can't put a price tag on that.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Yeah.
So yes, on both counts.
Todd, it's been a pleasure having you on, sir. Thank you so much for making this happen.
Oh, this is kind of cathartic for me. So you're you just you're kind of like a therapist, or bartenders,
Yeah.
barbers,
Probably closer
psychiatrists.
to a bartender.
Well, all right, fair enough. But I mean, I that's the other thing about this. To be honest with you, I say that kind of tongue in cheek that it is cathartic. But it does. It is. It's, how do I put it? It's hard to describe when you're not in that place. But I'll tell you, it is. It's a process, and it's a never-ending process. And to be able to talk about it, to express your feelings about it without condemnation or any fear of ridicule, it's part of the, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a healing process, but it's part of the process, and it does uh, it like we just discovered in the course of our conversation. You brought up, when we started talking about the setting of that 93 sighting, you got me thinking, what time of year, what way the shadows were going, and
Yeah.
how distinct you were kind of bringing up. You started out with how much light was actually hitting their coat, and could that affected the color? Was there a sheen? Was it dark brown? Was it dark? Was it black, dark brown, or brown? And then you got me thinking, oh, I had never considered that. And so, it's all part of the process, and it's a never-ending story, Eric. That's why it's been so hard for me to write a book, because how do you draw a line and say, how do you stop here when 6 months or a year from now you're going to learn so much more, and more things are going to come out, and technology is going to come out, and maybe somebody will actually find that evidence that we need to get them classified and protected. But anyway, I thank you for having me, and I look forward to talking again, and it's been fun.
It has been fun. I truly do appreciate you, sir. You're a gentleman, and thanks for making this happen.
Don't tell my wife. All right. All right, brother. We'll do it again,
right.
huh?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Good night.
You take care. Have a good night.